Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I'm here checking out One Step from Eden. And every time I think of that name, I end up thinking of Far East of Eden, which is something that almost nobody who watches this channel has probably heard of. It's a Japanese RPG. Back from like the SNES, well, it's not the SNES era, there was a Far East of Eden 2 on the SNES, but I think the previous one was like PC 98 or something like that. I'd be lying if I said I could remember, honestly. It's, oh man. Retro games, hurt my brain. Anyway, this game in particular, One Step from Eden, it is this weird combination of Mega Man Battle Network style combat, which is not a name I expected to hear again, at least for a while, and deck building and a lot of inspiration from Slay the Spire. Like, honestly, there is a ridiculous amount of inspiration from Slay the Spire. As soon as you see, like, the stage select, it looks so similar to the Slay the Spire stage select, just turned like 90 degrees clockwise. It's kind of funny, actually. But the game itself is actually quite simple. There's no story to it whatsoever, as far as I can tell. There might have been something on like the store description, but in the actual game itself, there's no story like whatsoever. As far as I can tell, there's no like codex screen. There's no like any particular bits of lore. It's literally just you got to get to the end, and to do that there's a bunch of monsters and a fair few people in your way, and you have to take them all out with however much prejudice you can imagine. But anyway, so as I said, yes, it is a combination of Mega Man Network and Slay the Spire. It looks fantastic. I will give it that. Like, I mean, it's not like top tier, but the way that they handled the sprite animations and just the overall flow of the way the graphics work, for the most part, is great. It legitimately looks like a really fantastic game in that sense. It manages to keep up very well with that as well. You can actually play this on at 120 frames per second on a machine that's capable of it and a monitor that's capable of it. And it looks grand, and it makes the game that little bit easier to play. And trust me, you want this game to be that little bit easier to play. All the mechanics are pretty simple to the point where they barely even bother with a tutorial. They just drop you right in. The basic idea is that you've got cards, which are individual use spells, and once you use them, they go into your graveyard, and when you run through all your spells, they all shuffle back into a new deck that you can then immediately start drawing spells from again after the shuffle is over. So you have to build your deck with the spells that you like, and just try and get to the end. There's all sorts of different kinds of spells too. There's tons of variety. There's spells that leave mines all over the field. There's spells that are just like general attacks. There are spells that leave status effects. There are spells that give you healing and shields. There are spells that make you do specific things in order to get bigger rewards back. There's a couple of extra mechanics on top, like Flow and Trinity, which the game doesn't tell you about, which I really wish it did, if I'm being perfectly honest, because even after 4 hours of runs, and this was taken by the end of this video was about where I hit the 4-hour mark. It doesn't tell you that much about certain mechanics that you kind of need to figure out yourself, which is kind of nice, I suppose, but it would be nice to just know a couple of these things off the start, or at least have an in-game manual that I can spoil myself with if I feel the absolute need. But yeah, the gameplay mechanics are more or less pretty simple. You just use either your spells that you've got in your A or your B button, and they'll be replaced with other ones that you can use. You have regenerating mana that you need to use to activate these spells as well, which is easy enough to understand. Keeps you throwing out your best spells right away. You've got little trinkets that can do things, anything from upgrade your health to make you start out with max mana or increase it, to increase your stats, to do things like give you extra HP when you save a hostage. Simple things like that, nothing particularly out of the ordinary. You'll have seen pretty much everything the game has to show you by the time you hit the halfway mark of the game, and after that it's mainly just enemy variety, more or less. You earn a new card every time you win a fight, and you just move on through the little flowcharts that they've got set out for you, and you just like go, more or less. That's just how it goes. There's really not that much else to it, which can be a little bit waning, and it wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for one particular issue, which I'll get to in a couple of minutes. The combat itself feels great. They did a pretty damn good job of bringing over the Mega Man Battle Network combat from the Game Boy Advance games, and I think there were a couple of DS spin-off games that use the same combat style. But yeah, they did a really good job in bringing that over to a more intense, into a more intense format. It just feels great underneath the fingers. All the spells, all of the bullets, all of that have pretty good feedback so that you know you're actually doing shit with them. It's all good. It's all good stuff. And the enemies are the same as well. They are varied. They've got a lot of potential attacks. They have a lot of ways to play around with your expectations. And they've also got a fair few different kinds of bosses, which are really fucking hard. Not by their own, like, reasonings. Well, sometimes it is, like, decent design that makes it particularly hard, but there is one particular major issue with One Step from Eden that I have to bring up because at first I legitimately thought it was a bug. As I said, I was playing this game at 120 frames a second on the PC. I know you can't do that on the Switch, so don't even bother asking about that. But yes, on the PC version of this game, you can play at 120 frames a second, and sometimes PC games have this weird bug where if you run them too fast, the games have been designed to run around a certain frame rate. So if you run them at a faster frame rate, sometimes things like attacks will come out faster, things will get screwed up or something like that. Sometimes it can be subtle, sometimes it can be really noticeable. And when I got to like the third or fourth set of stages from One Step from Eden, the game was getting so quick that I was worried that the game was bugging out because I was playing at 120 frames a second. Turns out it wasn't. The game is just that fast. You see, a lot of the bosses, and eventually the mainline enemies too, but it's mainly a boss problem, get so unbelievably quick that it is almost impossible to read their tells and prepare yourself to get to like a safe zone before you get your shit kicked in. This becomes increasingly common the further you go in, but you're guaranteed to run into it by the time you hit like stage, stage 4 or 5. Because the game is just, oh man, it is legitimately just way too fast for its own good. The enemies start throwing out attacks that are so quick, and by enemies I also mean bosses. They start throwing out attacks that are so quick that you almost have no way to dodge them. And there are some attacks that are literally so quick that you can't dodge them. Like there's this one attack that this one boss has. I don't know what their names are because they don't show you the names of the bosses that you're fighting. They expect you to know them from like the main menu or something. But there are some attacks they throw out that are so fast that you basically have no time to get out of the way. And there's this one attack that this one lady has that does like columns so quickly across your entire playfield that you're guaranteed to get hit by them. There's no way to effectively dodge it. And they move so quickly that one of this game's major problems actually turns out to be the precision you need. That aim cursor that you're seeing on the enemy side of the screen, that's 4 spaces to the right of the main character at all times, that's actually really important because the majority of the spells in the game, not all of them, but most of them rely on that aim cursor being in a precise position. But all of these bosses move so unbelievably fast that the majority of the precision spells that you have, which will be the majority of the spells that you have, just due to the way like the random card engine works, will end up being unusable against them because they'll constantly be dodging everywhere. And the only way you can really like slow them down in any way is to hit them with a frost attack or a root attack, which will slow them down or just stop them in place respectively. But those are rare, and even if you do have them, they're just rare enough that they end up being an extreme problem to deal with. As a result, you'll end up shuffling your deck more often than not, trying to find an attack that can actually hit them, just because they're so goddamn fast you don't want to use anything except spells that will immediately hit them. And even then, you might just get really unlucky and they'll just get out of the way of your attacks immediately, and you'll end up dead. And I don't know how you're supposed to work around that, because they are legitimately just so fast that they become frustrating to fight because you just can't predict their patterns, you can't predict where they're going to be, or there'll be those times where you can predict where they're going to be because they're going to be on your side of the field and you won't be able to hit them with any of the attacks that you've got. It's unbelievably frustrating to deal with in the long run, and it's basically the one thing that makes this game overly, like, frustrating to me and almost unplayable. It is still playable. It is still potentially beatable, but it's going to take a lot more effort than I really want to put in because, yeah, it's just too fast. That's the problem with it. The screens become over-elaborate clusterfucks where you just can't see all of the attacks that are coming at you at once and how to avoid them because you don't have the right spells on hand. And this is where, like, the random spell stuff comes into play because towards the end of the game, like, this run gets about, like, 2/3 of the way through the game, and I end up having something like 20-something spells in my deck, which means if I want a particular spell in my deck to come up, like, more often, there's a couple of things I can do, but they're all annoyingly complicated. One is to use the deck edit menu to select a certain type of spell that'll come up more often instead of say, hey, can I have this spell come up more often, please? Because it's one of my more useful ones. Or can I remove some from my deck? Which you can. You do have the ability to remove cards from your deck, but you only get one to start with. And by the time you hit like 20 spells in your deck and you want to get rid of at least 5 of them to make something a little bit more rounded, you can't. So I don't know if there's a way around this, but if there is, I am unaware of it. Also, you can skip rewards, but at the same point, I don't see the point of that. Like, what's the point of legitimately, like, just skipping a reward? I don't know. Do they just want you to admit that they've given you nothing but shit and you should just skip it so that you don't have to deal with it? That's kind of a dick move, guys, I gotta say. So, you basically end up in a position where you've got an enemy who's moving incredibly quick, is able of blocking off most of your field via the ability for her to move so fast that she can take out most of your field in one go. You're not going to have the spells you need to accurately hit her because you're either going to need to be in a part of your zone that's actively in danger, or you're going to need a spell that actually will hit them fast enough, which with the rate that the bosses in this game dodge is just not going to happen a lot of the time. Or you're just going to end up getting the shit kicked out of you because the attacks come in so thick and fast that it just feels honestly unfair at the end of the day. And yeah, it's way harder than it should be. Like, I can understand this being like a hardcore difficulty, but this just seems like it's too fast, too soon. And I don't really know what to say about it other than it's too fast to be enjoyable. There's too much crap going on at once. And some of the way the game's been designed make it so that it doesn't feel like my fault. It feels like the game's fault for just throwing on so much pointless crap at once and not giving me the opportunity to, like, at least narrow down my options. You do have the ability to shuffle your deck to get a new set of spells out, but that doesn't help very much. It really doesn't. It does do the entire deck over again, but you might just end up with the same useless spells that you threw out to begin with. And the more cards that you get in your deck, the less likely you are to get the ones that you really need. And there is like a focus option that you can get that'll let you, well, you start out with it. But you can edit your deck in order to make it so that you can get certain kinds of cards out. But there's like 10 different kinds of cards that have ridiculous names, and it just seems way more complicated than it needs to be. Can't you just say like attack cards, shield cards, utility cards, or at least little things like that, instead of having like these 10 categories that feel like they've got completely unrelated spells next to each other, but I digress. So yeah, as a result, it feels harder than it should be, and I feel like that I can't really make any progress in it. There is like unlocking cards at the end of a run depending on how well you did, but they have the problem of showing up randomly in the middle of runs. So you think to yourself, oh, I'd like to see some of those new cards, and then it takes you like 3 runs to see them. At which point they've given you a bunch of extra random new cards that you're probably not going to see for a couple of runs just because due to how random the game is. It's also not helped out by the character variety. Now, The game does have a fair few sets of characters. It takes a while to unlock them all though. I got them all at the 4-hour mark, but I'm pretty sure they patched this out, which is one of the crappy things about reviewing a game that's just come out, because they're still likely to make balance changes as they go, but yeah. So I got all of them at about the 4-hour mark, but here's the thing about all the ones that I had time to try. They're all extremely specialized, as in, they all very much rely on their one gimmick, instead of like general, like more applicable gameplay mechanics. There's this one who's focused at the start entirely on traps and making sure that the enemy is in the right position to run into those traps, but with my experience, those were really hard to use, and it just ended up being a really frustrating character. There's this one character who doesn't have like a big gun that they can throw out, but they've only got a gun that takes money, and you have to hit with the final shot in order to actually make money off it, otherwise you lose money on every shot. So you have to focus every single enemy on dealing the final blow with this one gun with a slow projectile that the enemies get out of the way of all the bloody time anyway. Because, again, the game speed. So, there are a few other individual characters as well, but as I said, I haven't played every single character this game has yet. And it's just frustrating, dude, that it's so fast. That is legitimately like the major problem I've got with it. If they cooled it, if like the speed at around the like middle third of the game was the final third of the game, I think I'd be okay with it. But having it be so fast so quickly just kind of defeats the purpose of everything, especially when you've got to worry about your accuracy, especially when you've got to worry about enemies that are going all over the place with absolutely ridiculous attack patterns, especially when you've got to worry about your limited set of spells, some of which probably aren't going to be very useful to you at that very moment, and you have to be like constantly shuffling or throwing out useless spells in order to get to the good ones. And if that was like the case, if it was like, focus a little bit less on the speed, focus more on the complexity, focus a little bit more on making it so that you can make a more built deck instead of having to rely on either getting a fuck ton of money in order to narrow your deck down, or just dealing with the fact that you've got 24 fucking spells that you need to know the effects of on hand in order to make sure that you're using the right weapon for the right job. Focus on just making it a more like tuned experience where you got to worry about less, the speed isn't as overwhelming, you don't have to focus so much on your precision or your accuracy, and this would be doing alright. Right now it's just kind of settled into the only for the really hardcore people who can handle the speed. Which is also kind of annoying, because it kind of goes against the whole Steam refund policy thing, where when you play the game for you can play the game for up to 2 hours, and you can get an instant refund at any point before that. You kind of need those 2 hours to get to the point where the speed will be like really kicking your ass and thinking to yourself, oh man, am I actually capable of dealing with this? Because I'm not. And it took me like 3 hours to get to that point, which is just really frustrating to deal with, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say about it. The combat feels fun, it looks pretty good, the variety in the overall combat is actually pretty good, but it's just so quick that it becomes almost impossible to manage in an effective way. And I find myself just not enjoying it as a result. I just wish they slowed it down a bit. That's like the one major thing they would need to do to get me back on board. This has been Blue Maxima, and I will see you all next time.
you